Yo, what's going on? This is Malcolm. I'm back with another M3 gaming video. I was trying to do an intro here, but I totally pressed the wrong thing. But let's see here. Getting started. I had something happen. Uh, do like to try to get the live started properly, but I think I went over on one of the sources that I was trying to go live on. So um, one of the things I've been trying to do is do a few more gaming videos. I play this game all the time, and I have the setup, so why not stream? I'm trying out a new build, really just like thinking about some of the topics that I'm doing for the live stream later today. Let me see if I can get this menu to change here. It's in my way. It says an error occurred. I'll just hit remove. Okay. Oh, well, I won't be streaming to my Twitter account, apparently. Okay. There's a lot of places to be streaming to. I think I already have the M3 Twitter account. I don't know why my personal one is turning out like that. However, I have a few minutes with Brawler active. So I was doing this build earlier. It was like a Strand Hardenstein armlets build because Brawler, well, first of all, I guess Strand, you have three melees that make tangles. I was trying to make the tangles into those suspend. It was a weird build. Uh, Weird. I don't even know if I'm saving it. So, um, let me see. I might just save it. I don't know. But this is the build that I'm thinking about running. Sun bracers right here. Let me see the mods I have. Um, that's weird. I don't know why I would do targeting, but this is I don't know which weapons I'm using, so yeah, a lot of this is kind of up in the air here. But I got 100 strength and 100 resilience, which is basically all I wanted on my build. And kind of wish I had done this before I got on stream, but I had to jump on real quick because, should be busy. Can't always get on. And I wanted to get on just because I don't know, like I feel better after having played a little bit. When I get back to work, um, just feels better. So let me just see that if I got everything and see what I got here. Advanced scout rifle, advanced bow, advanced sword, advanced machine gun, which I have some. Advanced fusion, and then the solar there. Okay. So yeah, I could definitely see myself doing that. Fusion rifle there. Pugilist, or even this bow. Okay. And my microphone cord is actually stuck in the microphone holder. Hold up. All right. So start with the bow, and I'm going to work my way through some strikes real quick. I think I got enough, like different stuff. I'm wearing the Vanguard thing here. Well, damn, that was like one of my best pulls, and I just randomly did that because I thought I had too many engrams. Anyhow, getting into the game so I can, play. Set up my camera here real quick.
Guardian, we've picked up a high-gain transmission. Origin point is somewhere along the coast, near the Cosmodrome.
Я в опасности. Системы повреждены.
That's Rasputin, the AI Warmind. If I'm understanding him correctly, it's a distress call. There are so few ballet fans left, Guardian. It'd be a shame to lose him.
All right, let's go.
We can't afford another omnibus situation.
I really didn't check my subclass. It's on solar. I should probably have Ember of Torches on just to get Radiant. Never really liked the Radiant buff, but it's mainly just because I can't notice how good it is. I don't know. I mean, more damage out of weapons. I know it when it's bad, you know, like when my weapons aren't doing enough damage, but for whatever reason, I barely ever notice the effects of damage buffs that much. I don't know. It's just maybe the way I see things. But let's see what I got going on here. Well, I got torches on, and I got this and that. I think all these are good. Yeah. Oh. It would help if I put on solar grenades. It's a pretty basic requirement of yeah, this is kind of ridiculous.
Got access. Let's go.
I'm detecting comps. Hold.
Anyone with a radio could have picked up Rasputin's distress call. If we don't shut it down, half the Cosmodrome could be at his front door.
Where the fuck is this dude? Okay. Invisible cunts. This is like
but no telling how
so rude.
It worked. Maybe.
Okay. I'm gonna check my thing here.
All that raw power. Someday we'll establish communications with the war mind, speak to it, understand it. If we are ever to reach a second golden, it will be with Rasputin at our side.
Let's try that. So I switched to where my grenades heal me or cure me. Can definitely keep me alive. Should probably be running Ashes to Assets. I mean,
I think we tried to bypass his database and gain direct control of the war sats. That would
some bracers are so busted. Just being real. Oh my god.
system. Let's take it out.
The fallen will claim nothing from this breach, not even the debris. I'm sending a fire team to seal the complex. This cannot happen again. It will not. Thanks to you, Guardian, the dream of the city lives on, without fear of weapons in the sky.
Okay. That was another flawless. And let me move on. Let's see what I got here. So 4,054 flawless strikes. It's a lot of bullshitting, right? Like it's a lot of strikes. I do play strikes a lot. But I did have something I wanted to do. I'm going to record a short video in between takes of this playing the game, right? So I'm going to include all my mistakes because, that's part of it, but I'm hoping at some point to edit this quite a bit. So the topic I had in mind had to do with dealing with whether or not you are in some way are you in collaboration with your own suffering? So I remember being in this situation where I cook and I'm cooking for my mom, usually breakfast or dinner, lunch, whatever. And she's a very picky eater. Like it has been difficult to be that type of person who, takes criticism because she's very critical of the food that I cook. And she's critical of everyone. So I know it's not personal, but I am a sensitive bitch and it sometimes hurts. And one of the ways that I found dealing with my own sensitivity is meaning that I want to be that type of person who gives, the one who, I'm seeking that validation of whether or not the cooking is good or not. When really what I'm, seeking that validation in someone else as to whether or not the food is good or not. Obviously, like we all have different taste buds, we all have different preferences. One thing may taste very different to different people. So even all of that recognized, I want the person I'm cooking for to enjoy the food, right? But when I did the shift to making sure that I enjoyed the food, and I'm welcoming someone else into whether or not I enjoy it. Like taking, for example, like let's say there's like a certain type of food that someone likes, and I make as much of it as I can to their taste, and it just doesn't work. But then when I start making it for myself and I have enough, I guess the criticism just doesn't hit the same, right? Like you can say it's good or bad, but if I've made sure that my cup is full, I'm not concerned with whether or not someone else is wasting something I think is good, right? Because I'm satisfied with it. This also had to do with like serving sizes and so forth, like making enough to make sure that she's being satisfied. But then I realized like it's really a sublimation of a lack of satisfaction in myself, right? So taking care of self makes sure that the validation kind of that sort of validation loop is short circuited, you know. So like if you're trying to please someone else, like what is that really about? I started to ask myself, um, what need am I neglecting in myself and trying to find in someone else, I guess. And it doesn't fix everything. It really doesn't. But it fixes most things. Like I think most of our suffering is bound up in the unknown biases and unknown preferences that we have. Um, I think it just makes it easier to criticize when you project it onto someone else, rather than it being something within yourself. So um, I know that I don't get upset as much when I have filled my cup up, you know. And what that means is really being in touch with myself. Like, what do I want in this moment? Am I numbing myself if I'm seeking pleasure, say like in video games or something? Am I numbing some uh unmet satisfaction? Is there some need that I need to satisfy that I am numbing over with some other validation, in others? And I think to a certain degree, all these things um happen, and I don't think it's anyone's fault. Um, you know, I don't think anyone has insecurities that come from themselves, right? Like all insecurities come from desires that other people have said they want from you, things they've asked of you. But the insecurity comes when you accept these requests, you know. And I think that's where, the key words that people are using, I notice now more than ever is, boundaries. And boundaries are about the fact that you don't want to do something and you don't have to, but you're doing it because you think you need to or that you should, you know. And there are good and bad ways to do that. And I'm thinking like not all boundaries come from a good place either. I mean, if you're being honest about it, like nothing is all good or bad, right? So obviously some boundaries are based in shitty behavior. Um, but in general, we don't give true weight to what we really want. And yeah, I'm going to think about that a little bit more because I want to do more posts on it. But filling your own cup first before you serve someone else. That's a huge thing. And getting some of these grenades off. I guess me being in the air does not activate the plate. You do have to be standing on it. Okay. Some bracers are so strong, and the healing is pretty great. I know how to do restoration. I don't think I got a restoration buff to that. I think the restoration comes from the Phoenix dive, which I'm not using. That's a lot of solar grenades. This is like. Do need some machine gun kills. Let me get some of those here. Why is this dude over here? I don't need you over here. It's up. Couldn't just go to the other plate. I wonder how that new super is going to work with sun bracers, right? Like they're bringing back the radiance super. This almost feels like the radiance already. Like That's so ridiculous. Oh god, so ridiculous. So I got the heat rises buff. Give me some of that green ammo. Am I sitting on top of my well of radiance? I think I am. It's kind of weird. I don't think I've ever seen that happen. I was just floating? That's weird. All right. Yeah, it was another flawless. I'm going to go back to orbit. Such a crazy build. Some bracers are.
Adjusting magnification and display position. Pause button. Confirm zoom adjustment. PS button and square button. Switch magnification. Right stick. Adjust display area.
Yeah, I guess that's it. It was pretty fun though. Let me take a look at some of the topics I was working on.
A transaction to make, Guardian?
Welcome back. Transfer. Goodbye.
Good to have you back. Make good use.
Good luck out there, Guardian.
Nice shooting out there. Not bad.
All right. So I want to talk about our perception of reality and how we know, for instance, that we're not really seeing the world the way that it is, but rather the way that we predict that it will be. So I've seen this video about the information about how the optic nerve, in the back of your retina actually receives more data than it transmits back into your brain. You would think with as complex a job that the eye has of determining what's in your field of vision, that you would be receiving a lot more information than the brain is sending back into the optic nerve. But that's actually not true. Basically, when we're young, babies are essentially blind because they're receiving all of this information, but they're still trying to figure out how to interpret it. You're building a model of the world, and what you expect to see becomes what you see. It's based on information, but you have to start recognizing patterns. Your brain has to start making the networks to figure out the world and the environment that you're in. It makes really good approximations and predictions, and those predictions are suited to a very particular environment, the environment that our ancestors found themselves in, that of being earthlings. It's pretty good that we still live here on this planet because, in any other environment, our senses would be basically useless. So the spectrum of light that we see is based on the most readily available light from our star, the closest star that we, and so, yeah, so like all of this is based on an environment, and at some point we come to a false conclusion that the reality that our mind constructed is the ultimate reality. I mean, why question it? And whenever I bring up this topic to people about like the fact that we're kind of hallucinating all the time, they look at me like I'm crazy, and maybe they're not wrong. I am crazy, but so are they, and they're insulted by the fact that I would question their perception of reality. Like everything you've ever known is just an interpretation. It is a prediction most of the time. Like the reason why the eye sends more information than it receives is because your eye is constantly darting around trying to point out the most important parts, because truthfully there's way more information out there than our brain is capable of processing. So it has to be selective. It makes shortcuts, it makes inferences, it gets shit wrong, but the way in which it gets something wrong is useful. I think one of the most interesting ones happens to be with this dual contrast perception. So you can have like, 3 swatches of paper that are all a, medium tone of gray, and you put them on a background of paper that moves from light to dark, light on one end and dark on the other. And wherever you place these 3 swatches of paper, they're going to look different based on their background. And you can actually pick up the pieces, move them around, and they will change color right in front of your face, because what matters most to our perception of vision is the perception of the object. It's not really trying to get the color accurate. It's not trying to get the tone accurate. It's just trying to get you to know that there is something there. And, so you don't run into it, so it doesn't eat you, so that you don't miss out on a hottie, a chance to procreate. They say, fuck, feed, or fornicate, whatever. I guess that's fuck, feed, or fornicate. That's 2 fucks. Was it fuck, flee, or fornicate? I don't know. Fuck, feed, or fornicate. Fuck, feed, flee, or fornicate. I can't remember. It was 3 F's. Yeah. Basically, should you run, fight, eat, or procreate? Like these are some of the basic instincts that we have as animals. And so we're trying, our brain is basically trying to make sure that we don't miss out on opportunities or flee from mortal danger. And so it doesn't really matter if the fruit is orange or red or chartreuse or whatever, just so as long as you see it. In fact, it's funny, our perception of color from a philosophical standpoint might have to do with the fact that these are things that we needed to be able to notice in trees. These are things that are going to keep you alive, with the fruit of trees. So, our perception of color might just be based on how the trees are trying to get our attention, because fruiting trees are that is the reproduction strategy of plants, is to make fruit that is desirable to animals, so that we eat them and spread their seed. And our brain is tapped into that, whatever it is, that information that the tree is giving out about, like, here is something you can eat, and so our ancestors that were able to see that perception, whether it's accurate or not, it really doesn't matter. It's really about whether or not it's useful. And so I guess that's where I get with a lot of spiritual beliefs is, I'm not so certain about the truth of their statements so much as, are they useful? Are they harmful? Can you get some sort of idea from it? Like astrology, I used to be so and I guess I still am super skeptical of any real claims that horoscopes make. But I've met so many intelligent people who have used horoscopes as a sorting hat of sorts with people. And as much as they're talking like gibberish to me about the different signs, I can't discount it as much as I used to be able to. And I don't really need to, because it's all kind of made up. I'm starting to read this book on Sapiens, and just talking about the fact that we were able to make fictions is part of what makes us human. It's part of what makes us able to form societies and communities, because we all have shared beliefs based in a shared fiction. Whether that fiction be democracy or fairness or justice, the pursuit of happiness, however we see it collectively. And we try to uphold those ideas, but they're all made up, right? And it's a good thing. It's not an insult to say that it's not true or real. How do I say that? That there's nothing that's true, even though it is real. That it's a fiction that has real consequences. So anyway, I just don't know. It's funny that I think about it. I've really scared some people with the topics that I bring up. It's really funny. To me, I'm just like, oh, this is interesting. It's cool that we might be dating AI very soon, and that this isn't a new idea, right? Like people have thought about this for a hot minute. We've gotten a lot of technology over the years that we've just forgotten about how people responded to them when it first came out. So anyhow, just a thought. Are certain beliefs just so out there that it should be kept to yourself? Like I'm starting to think so. So every time I do bring it up, it just kind of like glazes over people's eyes. I do enjoy it when someone actually shares in the joy and the wonder of how fucking um, bizarre reality really is. Like when you get down to it, the fact that we really are living in a shared hallucination, it's fucking wild, right? Like I don't know. And I mean, it doesn't really change anything about your life, like in your physical day-to-day life. I just think it's cool. It's like it's a different way of thinking. But I also am recognizing that a lot of our traditional beliefs got us to where we are now, right? Like a lot of religious beliefs about what it means to be human, like creation stories and myths, and like making us separate from nature, making us more than just animals in the stories that we told was useful. It's a useful lie. It is a lie because we are just animals. But without those lies, I mean, where would we be? That's also a certain reverence that, you know, I don't understand everything and I'm not going to, and I shouldn't. Like, it's kind of crazy to think that I should. So it's kind of, I'm ignorant about horoscopes and I'm never going to fully know what they mean or whatever. And so, I can roll my eyes at it, but I'm trying not to. I'm trying not to because I recognize, like, as a person who doesn't get anything out of that, I'm missing something essential that someone else is picking up on. And I can recognize that even if I can't personally see it. So that's what I was trying to get at. All right. So what am I going to use?
New notification. All audio in your microphone are unmuted.
Well, I got Advanced Scout, Advanced Fusion, Advanced Auto, and I still got a machine gun. Okay, so machine gun, fusion, and that should probably do Scout. I mean, this Scout is okay. It's kind of weird, but let me look for Osmosis Scout. Maybe.
Till next time.
Am I using that Imperial? I'm not even using that anymore. I got that.
Weren't you just here, Guardian? Earth's a good place. Worth fighting for.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Osmosis Scout. I don't really need that
Stay
though.
here on Earth if you can. Less complicated.
Ooh, adrenaline junkie on here could be really good. And then so yeah, kinetic, iron, heavy, strength is definitely good.
No substitute for a full magazine.
Watch out.
I guess I could do double kinetic. I don't know. That's fine. And I'm getting kinetic damage buff. Okay. I'll listen to one of my lectures real quick.
Suffering is a real, painful, and inevitable part of the human condition. I remember vividly one brush I had with adversity. My troubling circumstance involved an extended period of stressful and anxious waiting. For nearly a week, I was so nauseated I could barely eat. I woke up in the middle of the night anxious, panicked, and unable to calm my mind and go back to sleep. Each morning, I would awake and grab my phone, hoping that I'd receive an email with a resolution to my situation. When there was no good news, my mind would lurch into frantic planning. Which buttons to push, which levers to pull, and paths to pursue to attempt to fix my problem. All day, I'd be attached to my phone, desperately waiting for news. I'd look at my children and burst into tears, filled with love for them and loathing for myself, sensing that I'd disappointed them. Each evening, I would go to bed, strung out and depleted from a day of trying to direct so many things beyond my control. Each night, I'd retrace everything I'd done that day to get me closer to achieving my goal, and my mind would churn with other creative paths to pursue the next day. Never had I so wanted a situation to just end. The limbo, the seemingly endless waiting, was torture. And it seemed that my striving and grasping made my suffering all the worse. This encounter with suffering caused me to search for answers behind why this was happening to me. It caused me to reflect on the nature of divine justice. Did I believe that my suffering was causal or karmic in nature, meaning that what was happening to me was a direct result of something that I had done? Or was justice orthogonal, an inescapable part of human life, having nothing to do with anything that I had done? I'm hardly the first person to ask such questions. It's understandable to yearn for a reason behind our anguish. Storytelling has been a way that people across time and place have coped with the reality of human misery in life and dealt with the question of why we suffer. In our last lecture, we looked at creation myths, including those from ancient Babylon, from the Judeo-Christian tradition, and from ancient Greece. Each narrative accepted suffering as a universal part of the human experience and offered an explanation for it, too. The Enuma Elish suggested that suffering is just a part of the human lot. We were created to be subservient to the gods and do their bidding, and that's just the way it is. Both the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible and Hesiod's Theogony offered a more causal explanation. We suffer because we've done something to deserve suffering. In the Genesis story, men and women suffer because they chose to eat the forbidden fruit. In Hesiod's story, we suffer because Prometheus obtained a power, fire, that the gods didn't think humans were entitled to, and Pandora became Zeus's instrument of punishment. Stories that explore the theme of human suffering go back a very long time in human history. They're bound up with the oldest stories in the world, stories that explore the essence of who we are and where we come from. Today, we'll explore two stories, one very old and one relatively recent, about suffering and its meaning. We'll start with Strange Fruit, a poem turned song made famous by Billie Holiday that reflects on a violent, grotesque lynching. We'll then examine one of the most famous reflections on suffering, the story of Job. Strange Fruit, first performed by Billie Holiday in 1939, describes vividly the racist practice of lynching, the abhorrent form of torture and murder that took the lives of nearly 6,500 African Americans during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Lynching was a form of terrorism used by white Americans, particularly in the South, to control and put fear into the heart of Black people, as well as other ethnic groups. The ever-present fear of lynching pressured Black persons to stay silent about their unequal treatment as second-class citizens in America and to defer to their white fellow citizens. Holiday's performance and the description of lynching were so evocative that she could only sing the song in certain places and venues in America where it was safe to do so. In fact, Holiday sang the song in direct defiance of the United States government, which attempted to suppress the song, fearing it might cause social disruption. It's worth watching the depiction of the saga in the Oscar-nominated 2021 film The United States versus Billie Holiday, where Holiday is played by Andra Day, and also in the 1972 film Lady Sings the Blues, where she is portrayed by Diana Ross. Besides being criticized for singing the song, Holiday was even blamed for writing it. Holiday, however, was not the author. Abel Meeropol, a Jewish school teacher in the Bronx, had written Strange Fruit after seeing a photograph of a lynching that took place in Marion, Indiana in 1930. The photo that inspired Meeropol tells a powerful story of suffering. Two young black men named Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith were imprisoned on charges of armed robbery, murder, and rape. The next day, a mob of thousands broke open the jail to lynch them. In the photograph, the dead bodies of the two men hang from a tree behind a crowd of men, women, and children who mill about the foreground, some even smiling. How is it possible for people to express happiness after standing witness to, or participating in, the murder of two other human beings? The photo of the lynching went viral, as we would put it today. Thousands of copies were printed and sold across the country. Meeropol's poem was published with the New York Teachers Union magazine in 1937 and proved immensely controversial even before Holiday's performance of it. Strange Fruit responds to the suffering of lynching by confronting it head-on, painting the unforgettable image of those men's bodies dangling from the tree. It illuminates the injustice by juxtaposing it with stereotypical, idyllic depictions of Southern genteel culture, contrasting the scent of magnolia with the odor of burning flesh. If you've never heard Holiday's searing performance of this song, please pause this lecture now and listen to it. I also encourage you just to spend some time reading the poem and thinking about it. Holiday's performance of Strange Fruit was particularly incendiary. In confronting her predominantly white audience with the grotesque nature of human suffering that they either couldn't see or chose to ignore, she was an early catalyst in America's civil rights movement. She helped America grapple with its original sin of racism and its fundamental paradox. How could a nation founded on the idea of fundamental human equality subjugate an entire race of human beings and subject them to forced toil and the torture of lynching? Strange Fruit exemplifies the long-standing tradition of jazz and blues music as an important artistic and storytelling tradition within the African-American community. It helped them cope with the suffering they both witnessed and endured firsthand each day. This is what stories do. They highlight and expose truth where we might otherwise not wish to see it. They cultivate our humanity and help us see humanity in others. Stories help us better appreciate our duties to others by virtue of the fact that we are all connected in our shared humanity. Stories and song may offer one group consolation in their suffering while opening the eyes of another group the reality of that suffering and their own responsibilities to stop it. Telling stories about ugly truths can be a source of comfort, but also an important way of actively changing things for the better. Now, let's turn to the story of Job, a man whose narrative also offers powerful insights into the nature and meaning of human suffering. The book of Job is one of 3 books in the Hebrew Bible that composes a section known as the wisdom literature, the other 2 being Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. In this story, we as the audience are invited to listen in on a cosmic dialogue between God and Satan. One day, in heaven, the Lord invites Satan, or the adversary as he is referred to in the original Hebrew, to reflect on Job, a man so righteous that he even offers sacrifices to atone for his children, just in case they've committed a sin he doesn't know about. Have you considered my servant Job? God asks. There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Satan suggests that the only reason Job is righteous is because God has blessed him. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face, says Satan. Accepting the wager, God allows Satan to take away all of Job's earthly wealth and even Job's children. But in the face of this tragedy, Job still praises God. Job says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In response to Job's righteous reaction to his seemingly senseless suffering, Satan then raises the stakes. He encourages God to strike against Job's flesh and bones and taking away his physical health. After that, Satan is certain Job will curse God. God allows Satan to afflict Job with sores from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. Job's wife suggests that he give up on life. "Are you still holding on to your integrity?" she says. "Curse God and die." But Job refuses and still praises God. "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" he says. In the midst of his agony, 3 of Job's friends gather around him. They begin to argue that Job must have done something wrong, as surely God would not punish him without reason. Against each accusation from his friends, Job maintains his innocence and righteousness. The famous rabbi and philosopher Moses Maimonides writes in his Guide to the Perplexed a pithy summary of the arguments that Job's 3 friends made about Job's suffering. As Jewish intellectual historian Jason Kalman paraphrased Maimonides, Eliphaz represents the biblical or rabbinic tradition. Job is being punished for his sins. Bildad expresses the view of the Mutazalim. Job is being tested to receive a greater reward. And Zophar presents the view of the Asherites. Job suffers because of God's arbitrary will. Then, a 4th friend appears, named Elihu. Scholars think that an early Hebrew editor simply added him to the remarks in the work after it was written, so as to include an argument about suffering that he thought was missing, as there's no reference to his character in the beginning or conclusion of the poem. He is livid at Job's claim to righteousness, and also at the three friends for not having been able to determine what Job's infraction must have been. Elihu argues that if Job can't figure out what he did wrong, then he just isn't trying hard enough. He subscribes to this causal effect of justice outlined at the beginning of this lecture. After Elihu's remarks, God finally speaks out directly to Job out of a whirlwind, as the Hebrew text says. Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? God grills Job on the transcendent, intricate mysteries of the natural world, pressing Job to consider the wonders of the universe that he created. Have you seen the gates of death? Have you explored the recesses of the deep sea? Can you send forth lightning? Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? Job responds, metaphorically brought to his knees. I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I know that you can do all things. No plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my counsel without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. God then turns to Job's friends, reprimanding them for their simplistic and superficial attempts to justify the mysteries of God to man. Job offers prayer and sacrifice to help redeem his friends' transgressions. The story ends with God restoring Job's fortunes twofold, giving him more children and greater wealth than he had ever had before. What are we to make of the story of Job? What can we learn about it from the nature of and purpose behind human suffering? We can find one answer in examining God's response to Job. Instead of offering a straightforward answer to the reason behind Job's suffering, God changes the conversation entirely. He says that Job is not asking the right questions, but that in spending time with him and seeing things from his perspective, Job will view his suffering differently. This answer suggests that the universe cannot be reduced to simplistic equations of being good brings reward or being bad brings punishment. It is far more intricate and complex. We will never fully understand the mysteries of the world or God's ways in general. But the story goes on to suggest that when we take our eyes off our suffering and concentrate on God and the mysteries of the divine, the pain of suffering can be diminished. Suffering, if we let it, can displace our egos from the center of our view. And the more that we shift our focus to the transcendent, the better able we are to cope with hardship. We also find an answer about the appropriate response to suffering from this story. Over the course of their conversation, Job recognizes his ignorance and insignificance in comparison to God. He acknowledges his frailty and inability to understand the complexities of the universe. He now understands that reward and suffering are not necessarily correlated with human behavior at all, and that suffering is just a part of what it means to be human, endemic to the human condition. Job is humbled. In response to Job's story, we can ask ourselves, why do we think we are entitled to happiness in this life? What confidence do we have in our ability to ever fully understand the mysteries of the universe and our position amid the cosmos? As we learned in our last lecture on origin stories, people have been asking these big questions for thousands of years. Asking them of ourselves today can help put our own hardship in perspective. The book of Job challenges us to zoom out from the myopia of our limited experience and to take the long view, the cosmic and divine view. The story of Job doesn't offer simplistic answers to the questions of why we suffer, but it does elevate our outlook and help us ask better questions, which is what all great stories and works of art do. The book of Job and Strange Fruit, two different stories from two different millennia. What important insights about the nature of human suffering do they share? Billie Holiday's performance of Strange Fruit shows us paradoxically the power of stories to help us heal the wounds of suffering by exposing ugly truths about human nature and our seemingly boundless capacity for doing evil and harm to our fellow persons. She confronted a generation of Americans about the hypocrisy of racism and segregation in American life. Her storytelling offered America's Black population hope for the redemption of the senseless injustice of violence against African Americans during her time. Stories can help suffering be redeemed. Job, too, shows us our tendency to see things from our own limited perspective. He models for us a path for how we can use suffering as a chance to be formed, to grow, and to elevate how we view ourselves and our role in the world around us. At the beginning of this lecture, I shared details of my experience during an era of hardship. At a time when I was unaware of what the future might hold for me and my family, the stories of Billie Holiday and Job led me to take a high and long view of my suffering. I tried to think about how the misery I was enduring might be redeemed. I was hopeful that what I was going through might be forming me for a greater good or saving me from a greater evil. What are some specific ways that suffering brings our focus outward toward others and away from ourselves? For one thing, it can help foster gratitude. The trying time that I endured reminded me of the many things in life I have to be thankful for. I've never felt more profound gratitude for my children. When my soul was in despair, I would look at them and hold them, and immediately my heart would brim with thankfulness that would displace the pain. Similarly, suffering can cultivate selflessness. Adversity shakes us from complacency. As we learn from Job, it shatters our self-centeredness and our ego. It painfully but necessarily puts our view of ourselves into perspective. And it reminds us of our dependence on others. When we endure hardship, we are compelled to surrender our desire for control. Our vulnerability when we suffer shatters the myth of our invincibility and autonomy, and forces us to remember that we are members of a community where each person depends on the other. This is how suffering can cultivate our humanity. It deepens our soul and allows us to better understand the suffering of others. By offering an opportunity for vulnerability and intimacy, something that we should cherish, especially in an era that normally emphasizes independence and rewards invulnerability, it fosters empathy and tenderness of heart. And it reorients our priorities around what matters most. When I was in the midst of my difficult period, I had a recurring image in my mind. The image was of my fist tightly clenched, hanging on to something, a dream, a desire. Yet, though I hung on to my desire with all my might, my time of adversity was forcing me painfully to open my fist. I felt it smashed against the rocks of reality until I finally opened it and let go of my desires. I take this image to mean that sometimes we must come to terms with the loss of something hoped for, no matter how desperately we might want it. In doing so, we open up room in our soul for something that is perhaps even better. Suffering thus forces us to hang on loosely to temporal things, even good things. Suffering helps us place our hope in things eternal, things that truly matter. Believe it or not, suffering can ultimately heighten our joy in life. In fact, even just suggesting that suffering can be redeemed, that there is possibly a silver lining to it, is a story. It's a story that can correct a different story that many tell about suffering, that the world is out to get them, that they're suffering unjustly, and that there's nothing that can be done. For better or for worse, we're constantly creating stories. It's up to us to recognize that and replace negative stories with ones that give us hope and help us optimally function in the world. In Plato's Phaedo, Socrates offers a short anecdote about the relationship between pleasure and pain, which he quips would make for a good fable from Aesop. God wanted to stop their continual quarreling, and when he found that it was impossible, he fastened their heads together, so that whenever one of them appears, the other is sure to fall. In this view, pleasure and pain are apparently opposites, but are also two sides of the same coin. That's why we experience them together. But Socrates is also getting at a deeper insight into the human experience. Often, after we have endured great suffering, the good things in life, perhaps the simple pleasure we took for granted before, are that much more pleasurable. In his seminal work, The Prophet, Lebanese writer Khalil Gibran makes a similar observation. Joy and sorrow seem opposite, but are actually related. They are inseparable, he writes. Together they come, and when one sits alone with you at your board, remember that the other is asleep upon your bed. Both joy and suffering are part of the human condition, and when we suffer, we can take heart and hope that with the right response to our adversity, joy is sure to follow. Job's friend Elihu echoes both of these ideas. It's only after suffering that we can truly appreciate pleasure. Each of these are ideas for ways that we can use our suffering for a greater good. We can choose to let suffering make us bitter and resentful, or we can use it for good and noble ends, allowing it to form us into people who value the right things and who get the most out of life. For millennia, people have pondered two central questions about the nature of unjust suffering. Why do bad things happen to good people? And why do bad people seem to be rewarded in life? For Boethius, a 6th century Roman politician who was unjustly imprisoned and executed for crimes he didn't commit, these two questions were understandable, yet ultimately misguided. He explains why in his Consolation of Philosophy, a dialogue between himself and Lady Philosophy that he wrote while in prison, which reflects on the imperfect nature of justice here on earth. There, he concludes that it is impossible for bad things to happen to good people, or for good things to happen to bad people. Why? Because virtue is its own reward, and vice is its own punishment. Leading a morally upright life is good and right in and of itself. It's its own reward because the result is a coherent, tranquil spirit. Leading a life of vice and cruelty towards others is its own punishment because these modes of conduct deform the soul and wreak havoc on the psyche. As I said earlier, when we suffer, it's common to look for reasons behind our suffering. We want our suffering to have an origin and purpose. For our suffering to be random and for no reason at all is simply too much for many of us to bear. Would I rather my recent hardship be a punishment from the universe for a specific wrongdoing? Or would I rather this happen for no reason at all, just a byproduct of the randomness of the world? I'm not sure. But the answer to the question that we explored at the beginning of this lecture, whether the origin of our suffering is causal or orthogonal, is probably both. We live at the intersection of luck and desert. Sometimes we act in ways that cause us to suffer. There is no mystery as to the cause of one's Sunday morning hangover, for example. Other times, tragedy strikes and there's no point of trying to make sense in it or find an origin for it. Think of a mother who loses her child in a senseless accident. Such suffering is simply tragic. End of story. Moralizing it or searching for a reason for it will only make the tragedy worse. Our culture doesn't equip us well to deal with suffering. It has a shallow metaphysical view of humanity and the world. Anything that prevents us from achieving what the world sees as the highest good, immediate gratification of our desires and preservation of our material comfort, is shattering to us. It feels like unjustified punishment, and we're undone by the injustice of it all. I try to make it a point in my own life to cultivate a desire for things eternal. But through this period of suffering, I found myself succumbing to a woe is me mentality, not unlike Job, focusing on my own petty and parochial concerns. My brush with adversity helped me realize my weaknesses. It's only when encountering adversity for ourselves that we realize we don't have the resources to deal with it. Recognizing our blind spots in life may be an unexpected blessing of hardship. Most of human history has been defined by conflict, injustice, and suffering. Times of peace and prosperity are the anomaly, though they often seem like the norm for us today. We look around us at the injustice in the world and are dismayed, thinking, how could this happen? That's an understandable response, but it reveals a certain naivete about human nature and human history. We can put our own affliction into perspective and elevate our minds during hardship by keeping the magnitude of suffering in the past, as well as the great suffering of others in our present, in mind. This might better enable us to allow our suffering to form us and make us more sensitive, empathetic, and kind human beings. Sometimes, both amid and after a time of hardship, we are able to find meaning and purpose in it. We might even be able to say that we are grateful that it happened. Other times, we come out of suffering wounded and exhausted. Gaining a healthy perspective on a difficult experience can take time, sometimes quite a lot of time. When we do encounter hardship, instead of fighting and resisting it, which can only make suffering worse, we can choose to stay curious about it. We can ask ourselves questions like this. What can this experience teach me? How can I allow this to form me, fortify my character, purify my motives and priorities, and make me a better, more gentle, and gracious human being? How might this experience be causing the death of something old and worse in my life, and making room for something new and beautiful? How might this experience be redeemed? As we answer these questions, we intuitively create our own story about the origin, meaning, and redemption of our adversity, which can help us emerge from it stronger and more empathetic people who are better equipped to endure the suffering endemic to the human condition. In our next lecture, we will explore how story can help us understand another foundational facet of the human condition, guilt and conscience. I look forward to meeting you there. In Book 2 of his memoir, Confessions, St. Augustine tells us a story.
That was cool.
Yes.
So I've been wanting to listen to some of these lectures for a minute, but I kind of get bored. But that was a pretty good lecture about the nature of the human condition, right? So one of the things, I guess, in my reading that I have
Microphone.
something that I started to think about with my reading is I read a lot of nonfiction. You know, I like to get an idea of how the world works, how things operate. But it's interesting that things operate within a context, right? And something about fiction, the way that it draws, how it draws in a milieu, you know, and then peppers you with information, often from, a lot of research and scientific backed ideas, history, sociology, psychology, but it's not lecturing to you. It's just basically stating it and putting it in a context in which it is applicable. And I like the way that she talked about comparing the story of Job in the Bible and Strange Fruit, the poem, and then the song sung by Billie Holiday, and how they discuss how suffering and the redemption of suffering. If you look at it from the point of view of fiction, or if it's not true, you're not picking apart, say, the story of Job, like as a agnostic or atheist, like I've been in the past, just saying just how cruel God is being to Job, and who would ever want to worship a God like that. Taking it from a different perspective of like humans trying to come to terms with suffering and recognizing that, suffering is part of a good life, because you have to take the good and the bad. I don't necessarily understand how people have squared that with an all loving God, but if I take that aspect out of it and recognize that, the things that Job says in response to his suffering actually does make a lot of sense on a certain level. When he loses everything and he says, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. That's a really important message if you're taking it outside of religion, because I can't deal with the faith claims or the truth claims of that story, or at least the ones that people make now. But understanding that is how life works. When bad things happen to us, we often forget the fact that in order for us to have a loss, we had to have the gift in the first place. And of course, that's not something you want to hear at the time. You know, you're in your feelings, and that's perfectly acceptable. That's what the reason you're having those negative feelings is because of the loss, right? But in order for there to be a loss, there has to be a gain. In order for something to have value, there has to be the loss connected to it, the eventual loss, right? In order for anything to have value. And so no one would argue for a meaningless existence. But in a sense, that's exactly what we do when we want to wish away pain. Because without pain, there's no meaning. And it's not saying that you seek out pain, it's just you're trying to find some balance between the two. Find a way to enjoy things, recognizing that they're going to be taken away. And, not trying to avoid pain, because avoiding pain often means avoiding the pleasure that it's connected to. I always think of that metaphorical idea, like you can never cut a magnet in half. Like a magnet has a polar opposite, it has a negative end and a positive end. And if you try to cut off the negative end, you just make a new negative end. It doesn't change it. It's always polarized. I mean, that's just the nature of it. And, you're trying to find some middle ground, right? Where you can appreciate the good, obviously, but also recognize that the pain is the contrast that makes good possible. And so you welcome it in as you, how do I say, you don't welcome it into your life. You welcome the day that it leaves your life. You're welcoming it to leave, I guess. I don't know how to put that, but it's a bittersweet sorrow, right? Like, it sucks, but the reason it sucks is because you had something good attached to it. So, very cool lecture. I hope I don't get tagged for copyright infringement on, the different servers, because I'm listening to it. I don't know how this works. But on that note, I am going to take a break. I got to get some news stories ready for the M3 Live broadcast, and I wanted to do a promotional post. So let me go ahead and do that. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next M3 Gaming video. Catch you later.